Greetings, MBA students. In this video, I'm going to talk about these alternative economic theories and the different kinds of economic policies. And so let me share my screen and begin the show. So let's start with one of the most earliest theories, and that is this classical economic theory. And this classical economic theory basically argues that this market system that we have right now, the demand and supply, and people engaging in this market without any intervention, what they call the self-regulated market, this is the best system in place because market players determine the key factors like prices and wages, so what to produce, how to produce, whom to produce, is produced by the market. And some of the ideas behind classical economics is that supply will create its own demand and there's no need for economic policies. So what do we mean by supply would create its own demand? When we buy something, we in turn give other people income. The store owner, for example, the people who make those clothes, and they in turn go and spend that money and it becomes other people's income. So supply is creating its own demand. And so during a time of recession, for example, you don't have to do any economic policy because people will, as soon as they start spending money, it's going to pick the economy up. And during inflation, you don't have to do anything because people are going to cut back. And when they cut back, there's less money in the system and less spending and people are out of jobs and the economy dips. So that's the idea behind this self-regulated market, that supply would create its own demand. Now, I'm going to go back here. The second idea about classical economics is the golden rule of money. That is, money is like the engine oil in your car, and let money supply grow at the same rate that the economy is growing. So what the classical economics say, and there's a theory called the quantity theory of money, from which comes this golden rule, let the money supply grow at the same rate as the economy grows, is that money is just that lubricant in the system, like engine oil in the car, and it just helps transactions to occur. And if you just print money, for instance, it's not going to make a new car right away. We're not going to make a new computer right away. But what it can do right away is people can spend it, and then too much money in the system will drive up prices and cause inflation. And so that's kind of the core ideas about classical economics. Let the market be on its own, supply will create its own demand and follow the golden rule of money. Unfortunately, during the Great Depression, the market didn't fix itself. And we saw during COVID too, the market didn't fix itself. And so you needed to do something to get out of the economy. And if you just didn't do anything, we'd be in serious crisis. So picking up on the ideas of classical economics were these new classical economics. And they basically adopted classical ideas, but they wanted to add some more policies that could help stimulate the economy. And one of the policies that they recommend is supply side economics. That is, if you want to do anything in the economy, help businesses to grow and expand. And the way you can help businesses grow and expand is to cut taxes, remove government regulations and rules, don't be regulating climate. And so this anti-climate change movement, and bust the unions because you don't want unions to restrict the functioning of the market. And if you do all of these, you're going to find businesses and production expanding. And then the other theory about classical economics is why you shouldn't do too much economic policies, is that you're going to destabilize people. So if you are driving a car and there's a drunken driver in front of you, you're going to try avoiding them by countering what you think is going to happen in front of you, and you'll end up crashing both of you yourself. So the best idea would be stick to the lane, stick to the rule, follow the golden rule of money. Everyone will be well off. And if you want to do anything, do supply side economics. So that's the basic idea about new classical economics. Challenge with new classical economics is that our economies could become more complex, and we really need to do something to, like in the classic case of COVID in the economy, where it really needed, the economy was basically frozen. Nothing was happening. People were out of jobs. There had to be some massive spending in the economy. And so that's where these ideas came into trouble. In the same way, the monetarist idea about just letting money supply grow at the same rate the economy is growing, there were some challenges because the nature of money and what counted as money and how things could act like money, like a debit card, greatly changed our way in which we could measure money supply. And so if you had a difficulty measuring what is money supply, it was very difficult to control it. And so those were some of the challenges that this theory had, especially when the economy was stuck. So this is where we come to the third set of theories, and these are called the regulated market theory. It's not the free market theory, because the argument going is that there's times like in the pandemic where the economy is stuck. It's just like your car on a winter morning. You go and try to start it, it's not working. And it's not that you just have to throw away a car because it's bad. All it needs is a jump start. And when you jump start the car, it will get going and you are well off. And so how do you jumpstart the economy when it's stuck during the pandemic? You do fiscal policy, you do monetary policy, you do incomes policy. So fiscal policies dealing with taxes and spending. You want to expand the economy, you increase spending and cut taxes. That's called expansionary fiscal policy. If you want to cut back, it's called contractionary fiscal policy. That means you raise taxes and you cut spending. Similarly, expansionary monetary policy, when you drop interest rates. So the price of money becomes cheaper, and that way you can spend, you can take more money on loans and expand, so on. And when you want to contract the money supply, you're going to raise the price of money. So loans become more expensive, you're going to cut back. And incomes policies are ways to keep incomes in check by law, for instance, like a wage freeze is what they might recommend. So going back to Keynesian ideas, these discretionary policies, fiscal policies, monetary policies, and so on, can help the economy get to full employment. The problem with it, when to stop. How do you know how much you keep spending in the economy? Right now, in the time of COVID, here's the question: how much more are you going to put in the economy? And when is it you're going to stop so that we don't have inflation? And so this is when the government gets too active, then the rational expectations theory kicks in, and Keynesian economics can get into trouble because the economy might not function more effectively. Then we look at Marxist economics, and Marxist economics basically is one of these structural theories that there is in the economy, there are the rich and the poor, or the capitalists and the workers. And the fundamental identity of capitalism is the exploitation of workers. That means a worker is not paid for what they produce in an hour. So if you're working as a burger flipper and you're getting $10 an hour, but you produce $50 of burgers, where's all the extra money going to? Well, it's going to the owner. They call the capitalist. So the nature of capitalists, according to Marxists, is such that it leads to two crises. The underconsumptionist crisis is when the workers get squeezed, they have no money, they can't even buy the things that they need for their survival, and So the stores then are going to be stocked because no one can buy stuff. The overexpansion crisis is when the capitalists expands too much because they want to get more profit, and this in turn causes everything to be heated up in the economy: inflation, debt crisis. The bubble bursts and the capitalist economy will fluctuate from expansion and crashes, and this continuous disruption in the economy will ultimately result in the collapse of capitalism. And this is when state control and planning, the state will decide the three major questions of economics: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. And so everybody will be guaranteed a job, everybody will be guaranteed a home, those basic needs are taken care of. The problem with Marxism is that it creates a new set of elites, from the capitalists to the workers, now as to the party leaders versus the ordinary people. It puts a damper on incentives. Why should I work harder when I'm getting the same pay? Why should I make something better in a better car when I'm getting the same price? And so those negative incentives can also happen in the system. So this graphic gives you some idea about class conflict. The post-Keynes economics, this is a blend of different theories like the institutionalists and the post-Keynesians. And they mainly look at a very pragmatic view of the economy, and they look at structural factors such as class, geography, race, gender, power, big business, institutions. And so they blend both structure and market analysis and say, well, sometimes this free market is not working well because there's some groups that are benefiting, some are not. And if you don't fix that, you're going to have a problem. And so while they look at all these different tools like fiscal policy, monetary policy, incomes policies, they also want to change power structures, because if you don't change those power structures, if the Amazons of the world are still dominating the marketplace, then what happens to the small business in the street? And how can we make balance that power, bring equity into the system? And so the challenges with this way of thinking is that everybody wants a neat answer. People like classical and new classical theories because it's very clear, you can understand it, good. But what you understand doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing. But that's the challenge. It's causing for a very pragmatic view of the economy, and you got to, that might not be so clear cut to what to do during a time of crisis and so on. So this graphic shows these different interest groups and structures of the economy that needs to be integrated into any analysis. So that's the different economic theories. In general, they could be the market-oriented theories like classical and new classical, and the market-regulated theories such as Keynesian economics, and the structural theories like Marxist and post-Keynesian. And so as you think about it, you think about the reality that you have in front of you in terms of this current economy, and try to think about what makes sense. What makes sense in the economy today? Is it classical ideas? Is it new classical ideas? Post-Keynesian ideas? And integrate that into your thinking when you look at the data. Now let's look at economic policies. And when you look at economic policies, we want to see in the economy internal balance, that is mainly zero inflation and zero unemployment. In reality, zero means about 2% inflation, and zero unemployment means around 4% unemployment. And in the external balance, in the balance of trade and payments, that means our exports and imports, our flows of capital, you don't want to have a deficit there. You want to be in balance. And so how do we get internal balance and external balance? So there's a toolkit of the economists, as I mentioned earlier. One is called fiscal policy. These are policies dealing with taxes, spending, and income. And as I mentioned earlier, you could have an expansionary fiscal policy when you expand it through increasing spending or cutting taxes, or contractionary fiscal policy when you raise taxes and cut spending. You're pulling the demand and the economy down. You can also have monetary policy, and this is policies focusing on interest rates, the price of money, because you want to keep inflation low to about 2%. So contractionary monetary policy is when you raise interest rates and money becomes too expensive and businesses cut back. And expansionary monetary policy is when you drop interest rates, as we did during COVID, so that people can spend more money and get the economy going because the price of money is cheap. So how do we influence monetary policy? The central bank in the country is called the Federal Reserve Bank, and there are certain tools that they use. And these tools are basically controlling a key interest rate called the federal funds rate. Is the rate of interest banks charge each other for an overnight loan. The buying and selling of government bonds. So if the Federal Reserve Bank buy bonds, it takes a piece of paper and puts money into the system. And when it sells bonds, it takes money out of the system because it gives people a paper and they take money out of the system. It can also change the reserve requirements that banks need to have. So banks have to make sure that they have in reserves enough so that when customers come in, there's money to give them. And so by the way banks do business is that they keep, if I put $100 in a bank, the bank might keep 10 and lend out 90. That's how they create credit. So the Federal Reserve says you need to keep 15 instead of 10, then there's less money out to lend. And then lately, the government has been buying not only bonds, but also all kinds of other securities in an attempt to stabilize markets. So in general, the way, as I said, monetary policy works, it increases or decreases the price of money. When you want to get external balance, we have this balance of payments, your accounts in terms of foreign trade and flows. So here we've got to talk about trade policy, exchange rate policy, and capital of foreign direct investment policy. Trade policies, whether you want to keep it free trade, that means let any business, any country export to this country and we export to any part of the world. But if we don't want that, we're going to put barriers to trade. And what are these barriers of trade? These are taxes on imports, such as, and they're called tariffs. Or there could be things like non-tariff barriers, such as rules and regulations saying all packaging has to be done in this way, or all imports have to be coming only through California, something like that. Any rule or regulation, it slows down the entry of foreign products in the country. And we have institutions such as the World Trade Organization. It's a multi-ethnic, multinational groups of countries that try to negotiate the rules of trade. And so far in the world, they have negotiated rules around manufactured products. They've been less successful in agricultural products because farmers tend to be a strong lobby and need protection in many parts of the world. They have been less successful in which they're trying to reach agreements. Currently, for a long time, they haven't reached agreements on services and intellectual property and the flows of money between countries. So if you were doing trade policy, you might want to have a multilateral agreement through the WTO, the World Trade Organization, agreement between all countries, or you might go on a one-on-one, US and China, or regional, US, Canada, and Mexico, NAFTA, because that would help you the most. And then you look at foreign direct investment. Do you want to make it easier for investors to come and invest here? Or is it easier to go out to invest in other countries? And so a foreigner investing in this country is not necessarily bad because they're bringing capital to the country. But if they are investing in very important national security assets, like ports and stuff like that, people start getting concerned. Similarly, if you go and invest in another country, it's not necessarily bad because you're going to get income from that back into this country. So the question is more on the magnitude of those investments in other countries. Then we look at the price of money when you look at international trade. That means how do you exchange the dollar for the peso, the dollar for the euro. And so there are different theories on trade. One is the flexible exchange market, meaning let the demand and supply of foreign exchange determine the price. So what determines the price of the dollar? Whether people want the dollar or they're selling the dollar to get something else. So market forces determine exchange rates. And in general, the economic health of a country is also reflected whether people want to invest or they want to buy American goods, so they take their currency and exchange it for the dollar. Fixed exchange rate is when the government sets an exchange rate either below the market or above the market. So if you set it below the market, is you're wanting to make your exports cheaper, making it cheap for your country to export to other parts of the world. Some countries do that. And a managed float is a mixture. It's a hybrid system where exchange rates are allowed to fluctuate within a particular range. And in exchange rate policy, you'll be hearing terms like devaluation when you officially change your exchange rate from a higher to a lower rate, or in the case of flexible exchange rates, the appreciation of the currency is going up in value, the depreciation of the currency is going down in value. And then we also need to talk about environmental policy, and climate change is becoming a big policy. And here also we have market approaches, that is, don't have government regulations. See, let's put a market for pollution, and people can buy or sell the right to pollute. And so markets determine that, rather than a bureaucrat going and saying, you need a permit to pollute 1 million tons of carbon into the environment. And so the challenge between a market-based approach versus a regulation approach or a hybrid approach. And we're trying to have global agreements on environmental policy and climate change. And that's becoming central to our discussions these days because we're concerned about the quality of the environment. Similarly, when you look at poverty, there are policies that they would say, let everybody, give them the same access and let them decide, let the market determine who comes out of poverty and who does not. Others are government-based investments to, like food stamps, to get people out of poverty. And then there's systems-based policy that says you're poor not because it's a fault of yours, but because the system is putting you into poverty. Unequal systems like race or gender or geography or whatever. And so we need to fix those systems, and then we'll create more freedom. And here also there's difference of thinking about what to do. Some policies say give person a fish. Some people say teach people how to fish so they can become self-reliant and build the capacity to fish so that they not only know how to fish, but they can fish effectively. But then equity, if they can fish, then provide a space where they can fish. Otherwise, what's the use of them knowing how to fish? And then allow policies to invent a new fish and to even transform the individual fishing industry. And so a lot of these poverty debates happen over people say the problem is with the individual or is the problem with the system. And in reality, you'll find there's a hybrid approach that some cases it's individual, some cases the system. You've got to look at these different factors to understand what's actually going on. So those are some key ideas around economic policy that I want you to think about. And as you think about these economic policies, keep an open mind, look at what's going on in the economy around you, and then decide what kind of mix of policies you might have. But keep in mind too, that if you're coming from a theoretical framework, whether it's classical, neoclassical, post-Keynesian, Marxist, post-Keynesian institutionalists, they all have their theories on what do you do about economic policies. Either do nothing, or do something, or do a combination of things. And that's where theories are connected to policies. So hope you got some insights on economic theory and policies. And till next time, take care.